Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of eCommerce. Today, I'm here with Daniel Boone. No, not that Daniel Boone, the other Daniel Boone. He is a former student of mine. I graduated from ECU in 2017, and then after graduation, he found a role at NetApp, which is a cloud computing company, as a technical support engineer. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, Mr. Drake.
It's good to see you again. It's been a few years. So let's start with talking about NetApp, because this is a company that probably a lot of people haven't heard of, but it sounds like you're a not insignificant player in the cloud services industry. So tell us a little bit about what you
Right.
do, or even in talking about like what is cloud computing for those people who don't know it.
Right. So NetApp is a more of a data management company, I would say. So we are in the environment you have various different solutions for your customers, right? So you could have either cloud computing, you could have on-premise, or you could have like a hybrid of the two, right? A lot of our customers go with the hybrid of the two. So they utilize what's in the cloud and they utilize what's on the premise. Usually, if they have data that needs to be secure, rock solid, always have it. They usually do like an on-premise kind of style. And for the data that they can just access every now and then or something, or needs to be accessible by every department or wherever their headquarters is and all the different branches, they'll put it in the cloud, right? And they do that because on-premise is obviously more secure and it's cost less. So when you put it in the cloud, you're charged for various different transactions, right? So it's just a lot more cost efficient to have it on premise, but a lot of our customers like to utilize that hybrid cloud kind of solution. So NetApp as a company, and you're right, like no, not many people know much about NetApp because NetApp is, previously a storage company, right? You think, oh, they sell storage arrays and controllers and everything. Everybody knows NetApp, the brand name, but that's not something they really deal with. They deal with the Cisco. They deal with the other companies out there that Juniper, Brocade, kind of the networking routing kind of fields, right? Um, but what every company needs is storage. And with NetApp having the number one operating system in the world, ONTAP, these customers have kind of come to know, we're just going to go with NetApp, right? We're just going to go with this operating system. But NetApp has broadened their portfolio so widely to meet various different needs of their customers, and it's a little wild what NetApp can give out to their customers and what kind of solutions they can provide.
Okay. Good summary. So when you mentioned cloud computing versus on-premise, and to be clear, this is where your data is being stored correctly.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's like whether it's and for those who aren't familiar, how would you describe cloud computing?
Cloud is kind of that typical sticker that you see everywhere, right? It's the cloud is just your data on somebody else's server, basically.
Hmm.
Cloud computing is just a a medium for customers just to gather the data. It's very to gather data from anywhere, basically. It's very flexible.
Okay. And so as opposed to having it on premise, then you have to purchase your own servers and
Right.
manage those own servers and you put in your own networks to make sure they're up and running and people have
Right.
access to them and do your own identity management to make sure only certain people can get it, yada, yada, yada.
Mhm.
And so you mentioned a hybrid, which is kind of a mix between the two. Can you explain a little bit more about that? That's a little more confusing topic.
Right. So with your on-premise, you have a huge capex cost, right? Um, and with your cloud, it's not a huge capex cost because you're not buying any equipment. You're just paying for the service, right?
Hmm.
So it's a service model versus a capital model. Now, when you do a hybrid, it's kind of the best of both worlds. And depending on the data, that data, you're going to have, a smaller amount of on-premise storage arrays, and that's going to house all your secure data and your need to business critical data that you just cannot be without for that site. And then you have your cloud data. So people put it
Mhm.
data in the cloud that's kind of needs to be flexible, right? You need to uh, access it by a lot of different teams, and they could be in various different regions. So it's just easier for, let's just say, like development teams to access
Mhm.
something like that. Let's say they're doing testing in their environment, and they want to put, a config file or, whatever kind of Excel sheets or database that they're using or database record that they're using. I don't want to say they run a database in the cloud because that would be extremely expensive, you know?
Right, right. Um, and so I'm trying to pull this back to what I understand. So at ECU, we have
Mhm.
our Pirate Drive, which is, I believe, our on-premise storage versus Microsoft OneDrive, which is our cloud computing. Um,
Right.
and so we kind of have that hybrid approach as well, where some things can
Mhm.
be stored local, some are on-premise, some are on the cloud.
Yeah, but so that on-premise storage, that ECU Pirate Drive is similar to the cloud as well, though, right? So
Yeah.
you have an on-premise, like kind of a private cloud for ECU,
Right.
but then you also have more of a private cloud in a broader spectrum. So that Microsoft kind of divvies out to everyone that has Microsoft Office.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Now, so you work as a technical support engineer. What exactly is that?
So I specifically work with the HCI product, the hybrid cloud infrastructure product. And what we basically do is we are the front line. So whenever somebody has an issue with our product, we determine where it should be going because sometimes it's not our problem. Sometimes it's a different product in general. It could be virtualization. It could be a FAS system, which is kind of the traditional storage array. But with our storage array, we kind of distinguish the problem, and then we start drilling down. And what my job really is just communicating with the customer. It's saying, "Hey, Mr. Customer, here, what's the issue? What are you seeing?" And you have to be a really good listener at first, and then you can start investigating, right? So you'll get logs, and once you get those logs, you'll start drilling down to what the root cause of the issue is. Now, this root cause can vary for my team specifically.
Hmm.
It could be something as simple as a failed drive to something as difficult as we've had a 500 millisecond latency in the past 3 days on these particular volumes. We need to drill down and figure out what in our environment is causing this latency, or is it actually the storage array that you
Hmm.
support? You know, so it's a very very broad spectrum of what we can potentially get involved with.
Okay. Now, does NetApp provide the cloud storage, or are you more the infrastructure to connect with other cloud storage like Google Cloud,
Mhm.
Microsoft Azure, what else? I don't know any of the other one. Oh, AWS, Amazon
Mhm.
Web Services.
So,
How does your technology work with that?
so with the cloud, we don't necessarily provide cloud services. We provide the operating system for it.
Okay.
So in Google Cloud, in Microsoft Azure, in Amazon's AWS, right, we provide a virtualized instance of ONTAP. And we partner with all three of them specifically, and we provide this operating system. And it's an operating system that our customers just know, right?
Hmm.
So if they want to go to the cloud, we provide that operating system to them, and they already know the operating system, right? There's slightly a slight learning curve with it though, because you have obviously a couple of new things like cloud volume on tap and different cloud technology that kind of goes into it. I don't necessarily deal with a lot of that technology, but that I can see that that team is growing, and I can see that a lot of people are starting to move to a more cloud-based operating.
Hmm.
Um, and I do see a lot of the on-premise stuff going away, right? You don't really do backups on tape anymore. You do it on either your on-premise flash storage or you do it on like the cloud.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. And so, what does your day to day look like?
Okay, so my team is fairly new. We were the SolidFire team or the HCI SolidFire team was a acquisition of NetApp, right? About 4 years ago.
Okay.
So whenever I started NetApp, I was instantly put on that team, and that's basically all I've known for for these past 3 years.
Hmm.
And it was a startup uh, based in Boulder, Colorado. Um, and from there on, it just kind of grew, and it kind of is starting to mature, right? So it's a very immature product at the moment, but then it's starting to broaden, and we've incorporated into our HCI product, which is our solid fire storage, which is the operating system on that. I can get to that in a moment, but this is solid fire storage along with the NetApp compute nodes. So the compute node is just basically like a beefed up server, provides resources for your virtualization environment, right? So I deal with a lot of virtualization, networking, storage. Um, we can even add ONTAP Cloud as a accessible option in HCI. I don't want to say ONTAP Cloud is on HCI, but it's definitely something that uh, you can definitely branch out to and you can utilize with the HCI system.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a lot of heavy stuff there.
It gets very it's wide. It's a wide range. With me coming into that role too, I was completely just like eyes wide open. It's like, oh my God, I'm learning, virtualization, networking, storage,
Yeah.
cloud, all at the same time. It's heavy stuff. Yeah,
So, about how many clients would you estimate you speak to in a day?
in a day.
I mean, is it a constant, 20 plus, or is it like you get three or four people that you work with, and they're usually, most of them are bigger issues? What do you think?
So it depends on how big the issue is.
Right.
If it's a big issue like what I was just on last week, which is why we couldn't meet last week, I apologize for that.
That's okay.
But last week I was on an issue, and it was probably the worst issue I've ever seen. Um,
Mm.
Basically, there was just a super high priority, and I had to be on that one call for that whole week. So I didn't talk to anybody else except for that one
Right.
person.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you rotate through? I'm assuming you have a team, you said,
Oh
and
yeah.
so the calls get rotated through each of you, depending on who's available.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so like this one case, right? This one case needed 24/7 support.
Okay.
And we had to go to different regions and say, hey, we need you to be on this, we need you to be on that one next.
Hmm.
So we kind of had a chain of support engineers just lined up ready to take it whenever someone got off shift.
So should I assume you have worldwide coverage of this tech support? Is it
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
like people in India or wherever
Mhm.
that are on your team? Is it
Yep.
the same team or different teams, or how's that structured?
It's it's the same team,
Okay.
just different regions, right? You have different regional managers. So
Okay.
so we go from the Americas to the EMEAs to the APAC.
Oh, which are those different regions? APAC,
Oh,
Asia
so
Pacific.
America, Europe, Asia
Got
Pacific.
it. Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, having three different um, areas, each of you work 8 hours roughly a day, and that fills up the 24 hours.
Oh yeah, sometimes I wish it was 8 hours.
um, okay, cool. So, I mean, what's it like work? I mean, have you? I guess you used to have an office. Now you're working from home. How's that transition going?
Yeah, so in kind of in our office, we had just these big cubes, and there was like four people in a cube. It was very nice for like interacting and just turning around and saying, hey, how's have you ever seen this issue,
Mm,
right? And just kind of having a light conversation about it.
mm,
But now it's like I have to ping everyone, everybody, but I'm at that point. I've been here 3 years. I kind of know how things work a little bit better. I like to think,
Yeah.
and just going through, and so being at home's not too difficult. It's just it's nicer to have somebody you can just turn around and like, hey, have you ever seen this?
Right. Right. Um, now, trying to think how to get to this without getting too complex. I was curious more about like what types of technologies do you use in your day-to-day
Mm,
activities. So,
yeah.
um, and I mean, you could probably rattle off a bunch of pieces of software nobody's going to understand. So let's get a little bit broader. I mean, when you speak with, let's start with when you speak with clients, are you like, is it just phone? Do you do web conferencing? How do you usually interact with them?
So we obviously use phone. That's a big one. We're always in the call queue, the rotation, like you were mentioning earlier. And then there's also our chatbot.
Okay.
So our chatbot is called Elio. You can go on the website, talk to Elio. If Elio can't figure it out, then they'll get us an engineer on the line, right? And
Hmm.
that will come to us. Um, and then when it comes to us, we'll just chat to the customer. And usually that ends up with here's a KB, a knowledge base article on, how to set this up or how to do this certain task. And then sometimes it's a little more complicated and we have to get on a Zoom session.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And so is that part of your job, creating these knowledge articles, or
Yeah.
is that so after you've completed or solved a problem, you have to write that up?
Right, right. And I'd say that's probably like 60% of the job, you
Really?
know? Yeah, I'd say writing down documentation is massive and is huge for management at the moment.
Hmm.
I mean, it's huge for management in general, but there's just a huge push right now because we just uh, we just rolled out a new knowledge base site, which is extremely helpful. The knowledge site that we're using now, it's more like a form almost. So you have engineers with certain licenses, like you have like candidate and publisher, and a publisher can just go in and edit it, which is what I am. And if we see an article that needs to be wrote, we'll just start writing it down, work in progress kind of thing. It may take a month to get it completed because it's just that complicated, or it may take like an hour. Just depends on what the issue is. But management is extremely focused on creating knowledge and getting it out to customers and to our teams.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, that's not something I don't. We do emphasize documentation some in our program, but that is something we perhaps should be even giving more thought to because it does seem like it's a huge part of what's going on
Oh
in
yeah.
the industry. Um, all right, next question. So let's talk about this problem you mentioned last week, because this I think fits perfectly with what my next question is. I was going to say, well, think of one sticky situation or hard problem you had to deal with on the job, and you mentioned this 500 millisecond latency. Tell us more about that situation. How did it develop? What was kind of your thought process throughout, and how was it resolved?
Okay. So the 500 millisecond latency issue. That issue is actually still ongoing, so I haven't actually resolved that issue yet.
Okay.
Um, that's that's sort of what was going on a little bit last week. I will tell you about a similar situation though. Probably happened close to a year back now. There was high latency, not as much though. There was probably about 100 millisecond latency. And with this storage array being all SSDs, all
Well,
flash.
before you go on, why is 100 millisecond latency a problem? I mean, that's a tenth of a second. Is that a big deal?
Yeah, that's a huge deal actually. So if you have 100 millisecond latency and you have a queue depth of 20, 20 people trying to access the data at once, that 100 millisecond latency, your hosts are going to start lagging, right? It's going to be very slow process for them. And some of these applications, they can't have that slow process. So let's say
Okay.
you have in this issue, you have a SQL server that was putting extreme latency on one of the volumes because the QoS wasn't set right for our volumes. Now, it's probably important to say with our storage array, it's very unique. Our storage array has QoS that we can guarantee. We can guarantee the minimum IOPS per volume. And what that means is that if I have the minimum IOPS set to 50, it's only gonna it's only gonna guarantee that I get 50 minimum IOPS for that one volume, right?
Hmm.
Now for a SQL Server is extremely, extremely heavy, especially when it's doing a huge process, right? Like a backup or something. Now that's going to drive those IOPS way up, but we can only guarantee 50 at that moment. Um, Now the cluster then sees that we've had 50 min IOPS set for all the volumes. Now if it sees that, it's going to put those volumes across the storage array, and it's just going to randomly put it somewhere. It's going to kind of evenly distribute it out if it's the same minimum IOP. Which, if you have one volume on a node and it needs, let's say, 10,000 IOPS, it could potentially starve the other volumes and cause latency for them. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're using some jargon like IOPS that I don't really know what they represent, but I think I'm getting the picture.
Mhm.
So yeah. To say the least, it causes a problem.
Right, right. So the volume has input outputs per second, right? The IOPS.
Okay.
Um,
Input output per second. Got it.
so it's basically how fast can that data move out, right? How
Okay.
much input to output, you know?
Right. Right.
Um, Now, if one volume says, okay, I need 10,000 IOPS, it's going to starve the rest of those volumes. It's going to cause latency for those. Now, let's say you have two volumes that need 10,000 IOPS, right?
Mhm.
Um, that can cause major latency, which probably would scale up towards the range of 500 milliseconds. Now, that's going to cause an extreme lag on the host end.
So,
Um,
how do you go about finding out where the problem is? Do you remember the
so
steps you took?
Yep, yep. So what we'll do is we'll get the data store. So we're in VMware now at this point. We're in the virtualization layer,
Hmm.
and the customer usually knows, okay, this data store is experiencing latency, or we have hosts reporting that there's latency for this data store for these VMs, which is on this data store.
Hmm.
We'll then correlate that to the volume that's on the storage array, and we'll kind of dig down in the ID of, we'll get the volume ID and we'll dig down and see what the graph looks like. So we have this monitoring um, application. I want to say it's application.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just a general summary of your cluster, right?
Right.
Uh, so you kind of go over and you look at the graph and you see, okay, it's getting this amount of latency. Here's the queue depth. Here's the throughput. And we have to analyze all those different things and then kind of determine what the issue is. And in the scenario that I was referring to previously, um, the volume was actually starving the other volume. So there was one volume that was just extremely heavy with IOPS, and it was starving the other volumes, which was causing that latency
Hmm.
on those other volumes. So whenever we figured that out, what we then did is we adjusted the QoS of the min IOPS for the volumes that actually needed, a higher latency. And once we did that, our cluster is unique enough to know and smart enough to know that, okay, we need to guarantee this minimum. So we're going to take all the volumes and we're just going to spread it out across the cluster and in the optimal position to where the host won't get any more latency.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. And do you find yourself using or walking through like different levels? And I'm sure you're familiar with, I don't know if you remember the OSI levels, the seven. Does that come into
Yeah,
play when you're thinking through um, where the problem is?
I'd say a select few. I would say like the first three layers for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of experience with tech support way back in, oh, what was that, 98, no, 99. So, and that was one of the things I had to learn real quick is walking through those layers can sometimes help you identify where the
Oh yeah.
problem is, if you understand that. So, well, very cool. Let's see. Oh, one more question. So, Daniel, I know you haven't had this career for long, but what type of advice would you give to students looking for a career, either in a tech support engineer, as you are doing, or something similar? And I'll leave this wide ranging, whatever type of
Okay.
advice you'd like to give.
So I would say if someone's pursuing a career in tech support, I would say that you're going to learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very good career to get into um, for an entry level kind of position.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to learn a massive amount. Like I said, I learned, networking, virtualization, storage, cloud, all in like the first year, right? It's just so much data being thrown at you, so much information that you have to learn it. Now, I would also say get with a company who has a good culture, somebody who likes to work with you, right? You don't want to be with a company that's kind of cutthroat. You want somebody who's going to build you up and kind of teach you all these different things. You don't want you want that mentor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great first step in your career. And when you have that, from there on, you can kind of bring that same attitude to the next generation that comes in and teach them, all the nuances and everything like that. So I would say find a good company, which I believe I have. I mean, the culture is great there. I absolutely love it. I don't see myself leaving it anytime soon.
Great.
Now, I will say that start out in support, but don't stay in support.
Mm-hmm.
It's taxing. It's you're the front line. You get calls and people are upset, right?
Right.
People are, their stuff's broken. Fix it basically.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So I would say find a good company with a good culture. Um, Start out in support. It's is a great role to well, I don't want to say don't do it. You don't have to start out in support. There's other great roles out there, but
Mm-hmm.
support is a great role. If you don't really know what you want to do yet, you'll learn an extreme amount, and you can kind of go anywhere you want to after that. Um, hmm, let's see. You're not going to get a raise right off the bat. Yeah, yeah. I can't tell you how many times I talked to my manager and was like, "Hey, I think I need a raise for the amount of work I do." He's like, "Oh yeah, you'll get there." So, don't expect an extreme amount in your first 2 years, and then
Right.
after that, you can start being more realistic about it.
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right. Well, I think that brings us to our end. So thank you, Daniel. This was a wonderful learning experience. I learned a heck of a lot more than I did about cloud computing. So I appreciate it. And any last words?
No, I think that's it for me.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And there.